there's probably been about 250 to maybe 260,000, more or less, kids coming across the border already. Now I know they're kids because I was in charge of what they call the UAC database. It's a database that Health and Human Services has that has like the kids, has their picture, their age, and their sponsor location. So I was able to look and say, oh man, like, because later on I ran, I'm like, man, these are like babies. Some of them are babies. So out of 29,000, 3,400 came back to some sort of criminal history, whether that's reentry after deportation or it's up to sex offenses. I believe one of them was like a homicide. And they released all these. So I go to my supervisors. I'm like, well, released all these kids to criminals. What about all the other kids, not just this spreadsheet, but all these other kids that got released? Are we going to go and, get these kids and bring them back into a safe haven? And it fell on deaf ears. And it kept falling on deaf ears.
Welcome to Game of Crimes.
When you were doing drug cases in San Diego, what was the priority for the ICE office then? It wasn't drugs, was it?
No, money.
Money and counterfeit.
Yeah.
Gucci bags.
Yeah. Oh, and cigarettes too. Cigarettes. We did a wire case in San Diego for months and months and months on cigarettes, and they never even end up. I don't even think they even got a conviction out of it. Because it was taxes. Someone wasn't paying the taxes. So we got paid overtime to run surveillance on a cigarette smuggler. While all these tons and tons of dopes going across the border, all the drug groups and everybody had to run a wire on a fucking cigarette smuggler.
Unbelievable.
And, this guy ends up later on in life becomes like, like my boss becomes the director and this other guy gets all the attaché jobs he wants overseas and the same type of people. And it's like, the worker bees are just boom.
Hey, fodder.
Go back to that for a second. Once the dickhead sent you the email and then he realized it was an oops, did he try and cover it up or did he just kind of like?
No. He said, well, I hope you made the right decision. I'm like, okay, dude. Like, thanks.
Unbelievable. I mean, you got not only an experienced federal agent, but you've got a war veteran who just came back from a combat zone, and we can't take care of him.
Oh, and later on, I'm working. I do the DOD thing for a bit, the Army CID thing for about 7 months, and then I found a 1811 job in Philly.
Before you gloss over that, Ken, I just did it for 7 months. Let's talk about that for a second. Did you make it down to Gitmo?
Yeah, it's beautiful down there. I don't know if you guys have been there.
You're about to gloss all over this. Let's talk. Okay, give us a couple ideas. See that this is the we had one guy.
You don't talk about Gitmo. What's the first rule of Gitmo?
You don't talk about Gitmo. All right. Well, we won't talk about.
Okay, let's throw the FBI under the bus one more time.
Okay.
And hey, you know what? I love a lot of people in the FBI. Well, obviously,
we've all got friends.
It's not the agents. It's usually the agency. It's the leadership. It's not the agents.
But when you go to Gitmo, and I'll just say I went to Gitmo to follow up on some investigations and stuff. But Gitmo itself is not what you think. It's like the Key West. It's like rocky beaches. You don't have sandy beaches and stuff, but the water is beautiful. And I imagine the diving is great because when you fly down there. In these little, we had military private type flights, but the FBI shows up. And, because the FBI has to have their hand in everything, right? But the FBI shows up with all their dive gear, their snorkel gear and everything else. So I'm like, are you really here to do anything with the detainees at Guantanamo Bay? Or are you here to dive and fish or whatever?
Looking for lobster.
Yeah. I'm like, come on, FBI.
Hey,
you know what? I don't know if they're FBI, but they sure as hell seem like they're FBI.
So that job, were you associated with the Office of Military Commissions?
Yeah.
So after I retired DEA, I took a 1-year contract job working over in Tyson's at a secret location. And they brought us in me and another guy, retired agent, to review the cases on all those people in Gitmo.
Yeah.
And we're working for a 1-star. And I said, what's your objective here? And he says, we're looking for any new nuggets that would help prosecutions.
Yeah.
So we got to look at some of those people have been in custody for 15 years.
Yep.
We went back to the general. It's like, what do you think?
Government efficiency.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And he was a super guy. I love the guy. I can't remember his name, but I had the utmost respect for that man.
Well, I'll tell you, the guy they need to keep in custody and never let out is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Yeah, well, he was one of them.
Yep.
Yeah, he was
KSM,
still
man.
there.
So
See, you're
we'll just-
smiling. What's your KSM, story?
KSM.
Did you have any
No,
contact?
I don't
with him?
talk about. You know what? I'll write Sidif here and there, but I'm not going to talk about Sidif.
Yeah, it's there's things that you're not allowed to talk about.
You can
Well,
Google
just
it.
between us, I promise we won't say anything.
Oh, yeah. So there I was.
There I was. No shit. There I was, knee deep in grenade pins.
And when
So I
you're
ended up-
when
I
you're
ended
at
up
the
getting
military court answering why you violated your security oath here.
So Piccolo,
Well,
you
Morgan
have
said
this
he wouldn't
book.
tell anybody.
Yeah, he said it. I'm like, and anything I put in a book was all open source, so it's like, you know.
There you go. There you go.
And it wasn't anything like crazy. I hate people that try to act spooky that aren't anything to do with spooky world and like, oh yeah, I can't tell you about that. It was top secret. This is just basically, hey, you know what? You have to dig up case nuggets in there. So it wasn't anything exciting. I did have some decent training, which was really cool.
What kind
and
of
my
training?
passport, just interrogation training. But my passport photo was awesome because I just got back from the war. So I mean, I looked really good. You know, this is 190-pound Jason Piccolo compared to whatever I am now. So I mean, hey, I got that out of it.
That's
You didn't-
classified too. We can't talk about that.
You didn't get in training in rendition, did you?
No, Christ. this was post enhanced interrogation.
Okay.
where
Let's
they
move
had to
on.
start using the Army Field Manual on interrogations.
God.
Physically, right upside the head.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you guys. Okay, let's
move
go.
on.
That was
That was 7 months.
7 months at 30 years. Come on.
But were you down? How long were you down in Gitmo for that 7 months?
Just a trip.
Okay.
Yeah, most of the time it was at Belvoir.
What was it like though, coming in there for that first time? You know, you're flying in.
I loved it. Yeah. It's funny because my son's like, can we go to Cuba? And I'm like, well, first we're going to have to go to Mexico or Canada. Then we can go to Cuba. I've always wanted to go to Cuba though, like Cuba. Like,
Yeah.
Mhm. Me too. Just because, see the old cars and the old.
yeah.
the old
Well, you know why they got the
architecture.
old cars? That's because they can't import anything to
I
fix
know.
anything.
I
And
know it.
Yeah. But anyway, so you did that time. So you did your 7 months. Why? It was a 3-year contract. Why 7 months?
Well, I found a job in Philly working for the Defense Logistics Agency, which eventually turns into the Office of Inspector General for that. Doing employee investigations and trade security control investigations and stuff like that. But my goal was, at the time was to get back into, so I get this job with DLA and it's kind of like almost like a retirement gig. And that's kind of why I go over to ICE later on. It's very administrative focused.
What
so
year is
there's
this
this-
approximately?
This was 2007 to 2009.
Okay.
So I'm over there, I'm doing these investigations, and I did hundreds of interviews. Holy crap. Most of it employee stuff and follow up on contracts and trade security stuff, end user agreement type stuff. So I'm doing all these things. And there's another job opening in this agency, right? So I get a hold of this ICE group supervisor I know in Philly. And he wants to kind of semi-retire and come over and take over my job, basically, because he found out about it through there. So we're bullshitting. He goes, okay, I'm going to work this. We're going to get you back, be an agent over here, blah, blah, blah. He reaches out to my group supervisor, and I didn't put this in a book, but fuck him. So he reaches out to my supervisor, one of my former supervisors in San Diego, not the one that denied my request, but this guy had his hands in it too. Goes up to get a reference to make sure that I'm good to go. Well, that supervisor that I busted my ass for a long time, we called him Fat Blank because he was just a fat, God, I can't, to this day, it just drives me nuts. This supervisor goes, yeah, Piccolo volunteered to go to war because his wife got some bullshit job as an analyst with the FBI, and he's just trying to get out of coming back to San Diego. And it basically, blocked me from getting that job in Philly and gave me like a shitty reference and burned my name. So when I later on, my buddies, like I had a lot of good buddies that ended up starting to get into headquarters and start moving up in the ranks. And I took the group soup test, when I got back from the war, that's the other thing. I took a group soup test, so I'd be eligible to become a supervisor. So they could have transferred me to DC. So even if they didn't want to send me to Philly, they could have sent me to DC because I passed the group soup test. Because,
that would have been a GS-13?
No, that would have been a 14.
14?
Yeah, and this was back in 2007. So I could have been a 14 at headquarters too. And they didn't take that into consideration. So I end up, I get a job later on. My buddy's like, hey, look, I got a buddy. He's a manager over in ICE, ERO, Enforcement Removal Operations. You want to go over there and be a deportation officer? I'm like, yeah, fuck it. Gets me back into Homeland Security, gets me back into doing something that's...
Get you back into 1811, right? Badge gun.
No, this is 1801.
1801? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
One is like 1801 is like all encompassing. It's still law enforcement. Some of them are law enforcement, some of them are not. It's just it gets you back into the real law enforcement world, supposedly. So I go over there and I become a deportation officer in Philly. And at the time I was working a docket, meaning, trying to figure out how to deport people, reviewing cases and everything. I do that for a while. I get onto the squad that does the ankle bracelets. I learn how to do all the ankle bracelet stuff, the GPS monitoring of the criminal aliens. And then I become a supervisor in Delaware for fugitive operations. So I become a fugitive operations supervisor. And at the same time, I take this gig with the executive leadership program.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets me back into the world of drugs because for my leadership TDY, I do 90 days in Camden, Haida. So I go to work with one of my really good buddies who's at the time an ICE special agent, and we work drugs in Camden for 90 days, doing jump outs and shit. Holy crap.
I just heard a little bit of a hint of a Jersey accent when you said Camden. So did you have a good Jersey accent when you left Jersey?
Oh, you know what? I forgot to tell the story about being in Minnesota. So I go to when I'm in college in Minnesota. Let's backtrack here. 15 years, whatever, 5 years. I get to Minnesota and I go to get a glass of water. Water, and to this day I cannot say water. So the lady's like, "What? Water?" I'm like, "Water," and she's like,
"We don't have any of that."
Or a soda, they'd be like, "Pop." Everything's pop there. So yeah, the Jersey. When I get around my brother, I have another brother, Brian Piccolo. Whenever I get around him, it's like even our text messages are like, "Boom, bro." We start talking Jersey all day long, and I'm like,
"So what exit did you life off of?"
Exit 12.
Exit 12.
80.
There you go.
But I was born in Boonton, New Jersey, which is over it's down by Jersey City a little bit. And then my brothers used to box in Patterson, New Jersey at the Lou Costello Gym. Wow. So Lou Costello from Abbott and Costello has a gym in Patterson. So
Oh, wow.
Cool. So now you're back in Camden. So tell our listeners that are not familiar with Camden, New Jersey, just how safe a place that is.
Camden is it's a beautiful, beautiful area. Was it the murder capital of the U.S. at one time?
I thought that was Newark.
Newark was the automotive, the car theft capital of the country at one time.
Camden's a tough place.
Camden was rough. Can you imagine? And this is right before they dissolved the police department too. And man, there was like my buddy did a case coming in from PR, Puerto Rico, cargo case, 100 keys of coke. I mean, so much coke coming in. I mean, the ports of entry out there too. I mean, oh man, what a shithole. No, hey, Camden does have some beautiful areas for like a block. Yeah.
Hey, don't send us hate mail, folks. We're not the ones saying it.
Listen, Camden is beautiful now. No, there really is. I mean, Rutgers has a Camden campus. They have the ships there. The aquarium's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, there's beautiful places.
Did you work with DEA there in Camden?
Yeah, it was part of the DEA thing. It was more DEA than it was like, in San Diego, it's mostly all customs back then.
Yeah,
but DEA, Haida, and Camden was all DEA.
Do you know a guy named Sam Trotman?
I don't know.
He was DEA New York, and then I think he went down to Camden. He's the agent that ended up prosecuting La Kika, who was one of Escobar Sicarios that was captured in the United States.
Oh, Nice.
He's the guy that put the bomb. He orchestrated the bomb on the Avianca flight that killed 110 people.
Holy shit.
Yeah, he's a piece of crap.
Yeah. So that leadership detail was 2011. So at the time when I got done with that, and this is supposed to set you up to go into headquarters and management. So after that, I got an 18-month TDY to headquarters under this executive management program they had at the time. So I ended up going to ICE headquarters and working in operations.
Man, that's like going out of the frying pan into the fire, isn't it?
Yeah. And this was, I didn't put this in a book, but I think this
we have
might
a whole other book here of stuff you didn't put in the book. We're going to have the third book.
He left it wide open at the end for the next edition.
You know what? I am writing another book, but it has nothing to do with Homeland Security.
Okay.
It's going to be called Pivot, Transitioning Life's Roadblocks and like Detours or something like that. And I'm going to be interviewing a bunch of people, and your guys will probably be in it because I'll probably ask you to be in it. And it's going to be about how people deal with transition and different points in that oh shit factor, like almost like me, like when you blow the whistle or the SAC of San Diego tells you to don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out.
Yeah. Lovely parting words.
So I ended up in ICE headquarters, right? And this is operations detail. It's supposed to be 18 months, and then you have the option of staying. So as I'm there, God, I'm trying to remember the years now.
I got a bigger question. At this point in time, how long have you been married for, and how much time have you actually seen your wife during this time?
And are you still married?
Still married.
That's why.
That's the secret to
still
marriage.
getting to know each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Because I think about like when I was in the Army, I went to NTC twice. She went to Bosnia. She was one of the first people to go to Bosnia because she was a Serb linguist. I think she was like one of the first females to disarm like some dude was walking around with an AK, and she just walked up and she's like, "Oh, you can't have that." I'm like, "Oh God." So she went to Turbo Serbo course. So yeah, this is a long time. Man, that's it. That's a whole nother book right there.
See, we've got 3 books out of you now.
Oh man. So when I'm at ICE headquarters, we'll gloss over the whole, the years away. Holy shit. So when I start thinking about it, I'm like, man, it's been
2013, I think is what I'm looking at in your book here. So
yeah.
right?
So they, 2013 or 2014 is when they had this big thing about too many people were in custody. So ICE gets a notification from the president or someone that says, we need to flush these jails out and get rid of people that we can't remove. So they called us in on a weekend and they said, hey, you know what? We need to go through get all the ICE officers, 26 offices, and start getting rid of criminal. They got rid of, they released criminals, all sorts of hundreds of people. And then they go back and they go, oh, we released all these criminals out there. And I was like, what are we doing? Why are we here on a weekend? And why are we releasing all these people from the jails? And I think it started chapping people's ass that I was very outspoken about. Yeah.
How many people are we talking about, you think, over that weekend? How many were released?
You know what? I'm not going to throw out any figures. I need to go back and look. But it was a lot. And there was a lot of criminals in there, too. Because they were basically trying to... we had, I think at the time, there was a mandate of you can only have 42,000 people in custody at one time. And it was over that. So they started just getting rid of them. So... that happens later on. I become an acting unit chief. So I'm the acting unit chief off of both East and West. So I'm the acting GS-15 over 26 field offices. I become the acting chief of staff. Later on, I get assigned to this human smuggling cell, right? So it's part of the White House Security Council's human smuggling cell. And what the goal of this cell is to stop. Let me backtrack. 2012, 2013, thousands of unaccompanied children started flowing across the border. And what I mean about unaccompanied alien children, UAC, is what they call them. And I think it's unaccompanied migrant children because they don't use the alien word. But unaccompanied alien children were coming across the border. And what happened was they would either be paired up with an adult, and the adult would hand them off to Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol. And then when they get into Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol's custody, they get released over to ICE. They get processed. And there was like at the time like 60 to 80,000 kids a year. So our goal, the smuggling cell, was to go after the smuggling organizations and to find out, who the main leaders are and go after them. And that was our goal. We were at the strategic level, and we were supposed to provide guidance to the field.
Hey, quick question. At that time, at that point in time, who was running these smuggling operations, and how much was it per person being smuggled, if you remember?
It was $5,000 to $8,000 per person. And who's running it is obviously, it just depends on what region of the country it is, but it's going to be the cartel is going to be running it. It's a $150 billion business.
That's what I'm saying. Even back then, the cartels were knee deep in this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Because think about it this way, and I try to explain to people about drugs. Drugs is, you're moving a product, and that product has so many working pieces, and it's lucrative. But when you're moving a body, you're getting them across the border, and you're getting paid that $5,000, 5 to 8 grand, or whatever, depending on what country they're coming from too. It's a lucrative business. It's a flow that keeps going. How hard is it to prove smuggling a person than it is to prove when you have drugs in your hands? So many people, you could smuggle people all day long. And at one time, in order to get adults across the border, the border is the laws, the rules change with administrations. But at the one time, if you're an adult and you come across with the border, you have the Flores Amendment, I believe it is. So you can't stay in custody. A kid can't be in custody for more than 21 days. So if you're coming across the border with a kid, you're not going to stay in custody. You're going to have to get released with the kid. So they would pair up adults with children, and they would use legit passports and pair them up with a kid with a legit passport saying that they're a parent. And we'll get into that a little later too. So I'm part of this human smuggling cell, and thousands of kids are coming across the border.
Hey,
and
real quick question though about the when you say pair them up with a legit passport, were they getting fraudulent passports, or were they using passports belonging to somebody else and they kind of
were getting fraudulent legit passports?
Okay.
It depends on so if you can get legit passports through the passport, a lot of the ones coming in through let's say outside of the children, the South American and Latin American children, outside of that you would get a lot of special interest alien countries. People coming from Somalia or Africa or anything else would fly in using legit passports. They would fly into Brazil, and from Brazil, they would just take the same smuggling corridors as everybody else. So, coming in with legit passports, and then they just reuse them.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll give the process of how the kids factor into this. So you have an unaccompanied child, and these are anywhere from babies on up to 17-year-olds. So, you have legit babies coming in, and I'll tell you how I know that in a minute. Kids come into the border. They get handed over to either at the port of entry, it's going to be a Customs and Border Protection officer, or if it's outside of that, it'll be Border Patrol. Border Patrol processes them, hands them to ICE. ICE transports them to Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement, who then hands them over to a contracted facility. Now, these contracted facilities are all over the country. That's why you're reading in the news about kids flying on flights and going here, there, and everywhere. These contracted facilities are supposed to go by certain mandates. They're supposed to determine whether or not, and this was all in policy, they're supposed to do criminal history checks on people who are going to come in and sponsor these children. Think of it almost as like the foster care system. They're going to release these kids out to someone who's going to be a sponsor, or quote unquote, a foster type parent.
Now, these sponsors, do they get paid by the government to take care of these kids? Okay.
So that's the other thing. It's a little bit different than the foster care system. But while the kid goes through the immigration process, they're supposed to have a sponsor, someone that's going to bring them to their court hearings and et cetera. They're supposed to be vetted, the sponsors. They're supposed to have their fingerprints taken. They're supposed to be, interviewed. They're supposed to put them with a familial relation, but they're not.
And I'm hearing a lot of supposed. So it sounds like there's going to be some flaws in this process, right?
There's definitely going to be some flaws in this process. And that's one thing I found out later on. So I'm about midway point into this rotation out to this human smuggling cell. And one of my buddies forwards me a spreadsheet. And this is August 4th. August 3rd or 4th is when I got this spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet's dated July. So it's already been a month. That was like July, I think it was July 3rd or 5th. I can't remember the date of the spreadsheet, but that's not really relevant. But the spreadsheet's taken from DHS, took all the names of the sponsors and their addresses and their biographics, and they ran them for criminal history. And out of 29,000 of those sponsors, that's just one spreadsheet. Now, think about this. This is 2015. It's already been years. There's probably been about 250 to maybe 260,000, more or less, kids coming across the border already. Now I know they're kids because I was in charge of what they call the UAC database. It's a database that Health and Human Services has that has like the kids, has their picture, their age, and their sponsor location. So I was able to look and say, oh man, like, because later on I ran, I'm like, man, these are like babies. Some of them are babies. So out of 29,000, 3,400 came back to some sort of criminal history, whether that's reentry after deportation or it's up to sex offenses. I believe one of them was like a homicide. And they released all these. So I go to my supervisors. I'm like, well, we released all these kids to criminals. What about all the other kids, not just this spreadsheet, but all these other kids that got released? Are we going to go and, get these kids and bring them back into a safe haven? And it fell on deaf ears. And it kept falling on deaf ears.
Hey, real quick, your one spreadsheet had 29,000. How many total sponsors are there?
That's what I mean. Like, if you think about it this time, this is 2015, and the data is up there. So you can imagine if you go to the cbp.gov website, you could pull up the data for all the children, UACs that have come across.
But at the time you were talking about, 29,000 was the universe of sponsors that you were dealing with at the time, right?
No, this was just a snapshot. So what they did was they took a sampling of 29,000 and they ran 30. And
that's what I'm saying. At that time, you took so how big was the entire population?
They probably could have taken. Well, I was thinking over 200,000.
No shit.
Yeah, because think about it. If they took a sampling of all of them, and not even a sampling, if they ran all of the ones at that time, going back to when the UAC started coming across, it had to have been over 200,000. Because I think, the last time I looked at it was like, I thought it was over 200,000. I have to look.
Wow.
Down.
And so, but out of the 29,000 that you sampled, 400 had criminal histories.
No, 3,400.
3,400.
Yeah, and I didn't do the sampling. So that's the thing is,
that's 12, 13%.
But the funny thing is, I didn't do the sampling. This was DHS, Maine DHS did the sampling with ICE and everybody else. So if my calls to action fell on deaf ears. So that's when I always say this, legally blew the whistle. I went home and I actually...
Well, let's lay a little bit more of the groundwork. So let's talk about that. When you said you made your concerns known, let's talk about a time period. How long had you been trying to get their attention to say, we've got problems here? And in other words, we don't want people to think that you woke up one day, you sent one email, and go, well, fuck you, nobody answered me, so I'm going to become a whistleblower. Let's set some groundwork.
This was in person, and then it was also, I didn't give them a lot of time. It was days. And then I blew the whistle. Because I went to my supervisor was in charge of the whole cell. He blew it off. His supervisors blew it off there. And at this time, the email chain that already knew about this information had everybody, a ton of senior people that were involved with it. And that's why I always say, like, if you see some of these pundits on TV that were on, I know for sure that they were on this list. They knew about all this stuff. So everybody and their brother knew about it. So that's why I was like, you know what? These kids are out there with the criminals. I gave them a sufficient amount of time. I told them my concerns. They said they weren't going to do anything about it. And I took action. Because I said at the time, I'm like, look, I've worked dynamic operations. I know it's the government. I did fugitive operation. I was a fugitive operations supervisor when we had to go out and we had to go after fugitives. We do nationwide operations. I knew we could do the same type of thing. Go up, find out where these kids are, and get remanded back in the safe haven.
But let's talk about that for a second, too, because we're not talking about like a fraud or something. And I don't want to say it's just money, but it's just money on the one hand. Now, on the other hand, we're talking about the lives of kids and stuff. And so what I'm trying to do is really kind of paint this. This isn't just like if you had just taken the standard route and kept trying to bring it up to the leadership and stuff, you think you ever would have been successful getting their attention?
Never. This is 2015. This is before an election year. Can you imagine it came out in the public that we were all these thousands of kids coming across the border were getting released at people that could be criminals, that are criminals, that could be sex offenders, they could be murderers, they could be anything. And then later on, when I actually worked with Senator Grassley's office, they found out that kids were not only ending up with sex traffickers, but labor trafficking. They were putting these kids on farms. So it's not just the sex and everything else. It's like,
right.
It's
slavery.
Yeah,
it is.
Talk about this though. Before you decided to escalate and you say officially become a whistleblower, what's the process for that? So walk us through your thinking. What kind of things were going through your head? Say, how did you weigh things versus what's going to happen to me versus what's happening to these kids versus the process? Kind of walk us through how you approached it, philosophically.
Well, for one thing, I didn't want to be a leaker. I wasn't like going to do a Snowden type thing or Manning. I knew if I had to do something, I needed to bring it up to the right people. But the big thing at the time is my kids were 6 and 8. And I saw these pictures of these little kids and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I've always been kind of, a dad before, I'm not going to go out and like, even when I was doing fugitive stuff, I wanted to focus on criminals. I wanted to focus on the real bad element rather than just the mom and pop type people out there. But the thing is, when I went home, I was like, man, I'm like, can you imagine my little kids being in some strange place, getting abused? And I don't care where they're from. They're still little kids. It's not their fault. And I always tell people, I'm like, yes, there were MS-13 people coming across posing as kids, but the majority of them are like little kids. They're kids.
Well, it was easy to identify the MS-13 shitheads because they had or did most of them have tattoos on their face? Yeah.
It's not just the face. It's like, it's all the other things too. And that's why I stopped doing political stuff later on. Not that I ever really did political things. I would just stick to the things that I know. So when I did that, I went home and I started doing my research. I'm like, okay, so if I'm going to blow the whistle, how do I do it? And how do I do it legally? So I found out the Office of Special Counsel, the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, is supposed to look into other agencies. Now, I also did report this to the DHS Office of Inspector General as well. And
at
they
the
didn't
same
do
time
anything.
or first?
At the same time, yeah.
So the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, is that basically the OIG for the other OIGs or the other agencies?
The special counsel is supposed to be the ones that whistleblowers go to.
Okay.
I think FBI and the intelligence agencies, I don't know how they do it, but for regular federal government, you're supposed to go to the Office of Special Counsel. And I went to them and they ran with it. But they started getting pushback. Health and Human Services came back and said, no, we did a sampling of the 29,000 sponsors. You know how big their sampling was? Just
5
guess.
people?
I read 20, in the book.
Yeah, 25. Out of 29,000.
25.
And you know what? You don't even have to have a degree in statistics to know from a statistical standpoint that's not a valid sample.
So check this out. So I'm going back, and they keep going. They're like, and HHS is the one who provided this spreadsheet to DHS in order to do the data. But because my spreadsheet wasn't lined up exactly like theirs, same information, everything exactly the same. I didn't alter any information. But because the spreadsheet didn't look exactly like theirs, like maybe a line was off, they kept trying to say that it was false. And I'm like, but this is your data. Your data's right there. It's not like I did anything with it. I'm like, this is your data. And the funny thing is, if you go to the OSC website, you could find all my, and this is at the time I was anonymous because I was allowed to provide responses through my Office of Special Counsel lawyer saying, hey, you know what? Me refuting they're coming back because they didn't want to admit it. So after a while, after 4 months, I was like, you know what? They're still not doing anything. So this is October. The spreadsheet's July, and they're still not doing anything about this.
And during this time, I know this gets into part of what you did in the book too, but the whole process. But during this time, somebody's got to be trying to figure out who the hell you are, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's their focus now.
Yeah, their focus isn't on the data. They're trying to figure out who
They're
the hell
trying to
this
figure
guy
out.
is.
Yeah, they're not trying to solve the problem. They're just trying to figure out who's blowing the whistle.
Yeah. So I end up, it's October, and I'm like, this is getting to be bullshit. I'm like, I go to my OSC lawyer, and I'm like, hey, let me do an anonymous brief with these guys, and I'll do I'll call in, and I'll explain how this is all going on. But I tell them, like, look, if we do this, it has to be anonymous. So as we're on the phone, I go out to the parking lot from, it's like right after work that day. I go out to the parking lot. I'm in the parking lot there. And I'm on the phone with a bunch of people, and I'm like, okay, well, first off, before I do anything, I want a summary of everybody on this call. And then I also want their names and their emails, because I'm like, I'm not going to be talking about this to just anonymous people. So I'm like, that's the thing. So they're going back for almost like they're interrogating me. And I'm like, this is your data. It turns out that there was a bunch of people from the Office of Inspector General, from HHS, OIG on there, lawyers, obviously. So lawyers always got to be involved. But they kept trying to ask me, like, how do you know this data? Where'd you get this data? How do you know this? I'm like, look, how do you know it's not fraudulent? I'm like, look, I'm a CFE, certified fraud examiner. That was mistake number one. And I said, the other thing is, I said, I'm associated. I know about the human smuggling cell. I'm associated with it. Well, my dumbass, hindsight, is I'm the only CFE on the human smuggling cell. So literally, then this was a Thursday. I think there was a holiday or something. We were off. The next business day, I reported back to the HSC. My supervisor from headquarters that I'm on detail from calls me up and says, "Hey, your detail to the HSC is terminated." So they terminated my detail the next business day. I showed up to work after I did this debrief.
Doesn't that qualify as retaliation?
It does, I thought. So I ended up going to Senator Grassley's office, and I also filed an OSC complaint. Senator Charles Grassley is like the biggest whistleblower advocate out there. So I go with him, and he ends up going after ICE and HHS and calls them on the carpet and makes them explain to what's going on with these. And if you Google Grassley and unaccompanied children, you'll see there'll be a lot of stuff in there about me blowing the whistle. And not me in general, just as a whistleblower came forward, and he found out he did further research and found out about the kids, again, sent him to the labor trafficking. But it wasn't just the UAC things that I told him about. Grassley wanted to know what was going on at the border about the special interest alien countries and how the FBI and the agency and everybody else wasn't working together.
And let's set some groundwork, or lay some groundwork for that too. When you say special interest,
so
what does that mean?
That means like countries that may have ties to terrorism.
And we're talking about like Somalia, like
Sudan,
like
Somalia and everything,
places like that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I always tell people about when it comes to immigration and aliens, and whether or not they're coming over here for nefarious reasons or not. If somebody has never been encountered by the intelligence community or law enforcement, you can vet them all day long.
And you won't get shit.
You don't have resources to go down there and interrogate everybody coming across the border. You don't.
And I want to make a point. We're recording this obviously before it comes out, but in today's news, the reason I'm making a point here, in today's news, they just stopped a plot at UK Heathrow where uranium was coming into the country, being sent to Iranians in the UK. And it reminds me of the movie. Sean Bean was in it, but to your point, they called it clean skin. You bring people in that have no history, no contact, and they're able to fly under the radar and be operational right under our noses.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me ask you too. So, your detail is terminated, and so you went back to where?
I went back to ICE headquarters. And that's what's funny, because they put my cubicle is smack dab in the middle of, I had other officers that were like, junior to me that had like regular offices. They put me smack dab in the middle of like everywhere so everybody could see me. And I remember I'd come back and my cubicle be all jacked up. Like you could tell people were looking around it. My Outlook files would be all corrupted. Like they were after me. And I was lucky enough to find another job that got me out of there, but it still took me until February to get out of there.
Well, didn't they attack? Didn't you have an attack on your email account?
Yeah, I got so my personal email one day got flooded with like thousands, I think like 10,000 spam emails. And I can, and I'm
How
a little paranoid
childish.
this time. I think I see G rides up the road. There's people walking. I live near a trail. People are walking on a trail that don't have like trail walk and stuff. I mean, it was getting like really out of hand. And I don't like to be like that paranoid, but I was paranoid at this time. And it was just like, and here I am thinking, I'm like, this time I got 15 years in with just the Fed, 15, 16 years in with just the Fed. And then you put the military in there. And I'm like, it's a long fucking time to be.
Well, you know what pisses me off more than anything else is here's somebody who served their country, served their nation, served, in a variety of positions. And yet we've got to be so childish that we have to screw with your email accounts, jack up it's like, seriously, people, we're trying to stop terrorists. We're trying to ensure national security, trying to stop, think about just the amount of fentanyl coming in, but not just across the ports, but between the ports. And the human smuggling that's going on. We got all of this stuff going on, and yet you guys got time to fuck around and do this shit? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and I went to OIG with it. I went here, and I worked at Grassley's office. But, I do want to backtrack to my brother and stuff and dealing with that warden. And that was the first, when I dealt with the warden, my brother dying, that was the first time I actually looked at law enforcement a little bit different than I always have. The glaze came off. That thinking that things are supposed to be, there's good and bad. And when you're on the good side, that everybody's on the good side. And then later on, when this happened, I'm like, I thought back to my brother, and I thought back to that warden. I thought back to him dying, and why nobody took care of him. And I was like, and how people look at it is like, there is a gray. There are people that are kind of moving more towards the bad guy that could be working for the government. It's scary.
Yeah, they're one paycheck away from being that person.
Yeah. We're talking about careers,
Well, and that's those people are the ones that become more career focused and advancing themselves at the cost of everybody else. They think that's leadership. That's got nothing to do with leadership.
What's
that's
very
not even
Machiavellian is all it is that you're backstabbing everybody else to get yourself ahead. It's like the guys, the 90-day wonders that come over in theater so they can get their, combat patches and all that other stuff. And then they go back.
I have to laugh because, I'll talk about it now because I'm retiring this month or next month, but I get a job with the Environmental Protection Agency as an associate special agent in charge on ASAC, not an assistant special agent in charge. This is because it's headquarters based, but they brought me over to be the assistant director of operations.
And what year was this?
This was 2016.
And so you basically kind of terminated your time with ICE, right?
Yeah. So I went over and I got my 1811 back with EPA CID, and I give them, I'm not gonna go too much into EPA. But let's just say they brought me over for a certain position. But I think when all of this came out that I was a whistleblower, that I will retire as a GS-14. I won't. My career was over with after I blew the whistle. So let's fast forward through a lot of the EPA stuff. But I just came off of a president's management detail. And guess where I was assigned to?
I know.
Department of Homeland Security, Office of Policy. So I had a really good boss, my last boss with EPA, and I was able to. He got me onto this president's management rotation, which is a big deal. I mean, I've always wanted to get on one of these things. I go to work for a DHS policy, so here I am reporting back to DHS,
but as an EPA employee.
As an EPA employee.
And they can't do shit to you. I mean, they can kind of mess with you, but they can't do shit to you, right?
That's a story for another day. But the funny thing is, here I am working at headquarters for DHS at the highest levels. I'm putting together briefs and with the White House, conference calls, top secret conference calls with the White House. I'm putting together briefs for the DHS secretary, and I'm thinking to myself, I guess he never Googled me. I mean, you can kind of tell about you could tell at one point through this detail, and I'm not going to get too much into it yet because I'm still here in the government. But you could tell somewhere through this detail that they must have Googled me. I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's do this. Why don't you tell us what it is, and we will put this podcast out after you retire.
No, we'll leave it at that.
Come on, let's work out a deal. You help me, I help you.
That'll be the follow-up interview.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's what we'll do. We'll schedule a follow-up. But before we leave this too much, but tell us about your experience then versus what we're seeing now with everything that's going on at the border.
Oh God, you know what? I should not glaze over this at all. Grassley's office was amazing. So 2016, Grassley calls him on a carpet. This stuff starts going public. They start vetting the sponsors. They pass it that they're going to start doing fingerprints. Later on, they start doing DNA with these adults. This is all under a different administration, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to get political about this, but last March, so something positive came out of my whistleblowing. They started vetting sponsors. They started doing DNA. Last March, because there's so many people coming across the border and so many kids, they stopped vetting the sponsors again. So now there's no more vetting the sponsors. I would love for someone to listen to this podcast and go, what? Because it kind of flew under the radar that they're not vetting him anymore. Now, maybe they have since March. I don't think so.
But one of the reasons they stopped is just because, like anything else, they're getting overwhelmed at the border. The number of people are coming across. I mean, they are we found this out from talking to some other folks. They are redirecting people from enforcement operations to admin operations just to do processing. And so we've got fewer people. We don't need 87,000 IRS agents. What we need is 87,000, border patrol, and ICE people.
Okay, listen to this. Special agent, proactive, working drugs. Let's talk about money laundering. Let's talk about child exploitation. Let's talk about child pornography. Let's talk about human smuggling, human trafficking. Let's talk about actual investigations. Now, you're taking all of these Homeland Security investigations, special agents, and you're putting them on a border to transport people, to process, to do stuff that you're not working cases. They're taking everybody from everywhere and putting them on a border, babysitting bodies, not working investigations, So you're going to hire 87,000 IRS people or whatever. The thing is, it'd be great to hire 87,000 Border Patrol agents, but where are you going to find 87,000 people that do those jobs? You're not going to find people that do any of these jobs. I mean, HSI just had a job announcement the other day. How many people are going to make it through the system? How many people are going to pass a polygraph? How many people are going to be able to pass a PT test?
The drug test.
The drug test. Every test. I mean,
are you familiar with Clowra-Piven?
No.
Clowra-Piven was a strategy created back in the 60s. A couple sociologists. I just pulled it up. I want to read this to you. Listen to this definition of what their strategy was and tell me if this doesn't sound like it. The two stated that many Americans who were eligible for welfare were not receiving benefits and that a welfare enrollment drive would strain local budgets, precipitating a crisis at the state and local levels that would be a wake-up call for the federal government. And particularly, it says here, the Democratic Party, there would also be side consequences. But basically, what it did is you create such a crisis that everything blows up. And I mean, this is exactly what it is. I mean, when we talk about resources being strained, can you imagine these cities all along the border, California, Arizona, Texas and stuff? I feel so sorry for these city and local governments that are trying to deal with. And guys, I'm not getting political here. I mean, but what I'm saying is, but when you ship 25 or 50 to New York and they start whining, or Chicago, it's like 25 or 50. These towns in Texas would be glad if it was only 25 or 50 coming in.
Look at El Paso today. I mean, today, right now.
Literally, yeah. Well, millions.
Look at it, because they cleaned it up just for the presidential visit. And I know people are going to say you're getting political. No, if you can clean it up for that, why can't you clean it up for other things? Why did it take a presidential visit to clean up the area?
Where's humanity? Not to get the holier than thou attitude, but the vast majority of men and women that go into these type of jobs, law enforcement particularly, is to help others. How in the hell are we? It's we've had these discussions on other shows, and especially on our Patreon channel about immigration and what our thoughts are on the rule of law. I'm a big proponent of the rule of law. Go through the normal process. Are there exceptions to every rule? Of course there are, but not like it's coming across now. That's like people just want the border wide open and come and go as they please, and that's not what we do here in the United States. That's not what we should be doing.
My viewpoint on immigration law, it's very simple. Nothing is going to get passed right now the way it is. Nothing. So in order to pass it, find the areas within that huge billion-page document, piecemeal it. Say, okay, what can we fix today that both parties can do it?
Yeah, because they want an all or nothing thing, and it's like it's not an all or nothing thing. You got to start.
Right.
You got to start somewhere. You got to start small.
Piecemeal this thing. Listen, we need worker visas. Sure. Let's say this: you come over here for 2-3 years, you get a worker visa you could work at a field or a farm or somewhere like that. But then you have to go back and you have to get vetted. Run your criminal history check. Whatever, DNA, in case you don't come up, because we know not everybody's coming across that hasn't been didn't offend over that 3 years. So, you have to stay legal. You have to go back. You have to apply and you have to come back. So,
and Jason, when they started doing what they called the server in the sky over in Iraq during your time there in Tikrit, it was the one famous case called the Dirt Farmer from Tikrit. Army stopped this guy, ran his fingerprints through the FBI database. They had access to it. Guy had 13 fucking felony arrests in the United States, and he's over in Iraq.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if people only knew what was coming across the border, and not only what, but who, they don't. Hey, let me ask you this question while we're here right now. Let's assume that you were the HMFIC, which for those you folks who are wondering what the acronym is, that's the head motherfucker in charge. Let's say that you could institute any law, policy, rule. Let's say not law because that's Congress, but policy, rule. What would you do different? Give us like 2 or 3 things. What would you do different today that you believe, from your experience, would make an impact on solving, at least stopping the flow or preventing a lot of this exploitation?
Public relations. You need to stop the flow. Listen, right now, our PR machine is saying as long as you get across that border and you get a foothold here, you're going to get some sort of immigrant benefit. The U.S. can't pass the law. So what you need to do is you need to go down south and you need to change everything going on down south. You need to figure out why are these people coming across the border? What's the pull? Because I guarantee if you go down south in some of these countries, there's going to be billboards telling you to make it across the border, go here and there. The other thing too is the pull, the economic pull. Now, what was it? During a previous administration, I think it was down near New Orleans or one of those states down there. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, went down there and they raided a bunch of factories, but they didn't arrest any of the aliens, the people working there, unless they were criminals, and then they arrested them. But they interviewed everybody and they released them, because what's happening is all of these factories are hiring these people and they're pulling them here to work, and the HSI was going after. It's called workforce enforcement. They're going after these big companies. But in order to go after the big companies, you have to interview all the people that are here illegally, and you have to build a case. They stopped doing that type of enforcement. Because again, about this way, if you're pulling people across the border to work in these places and they're here illegally, these companies have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want to them. You can't go file an EEO if you're here illegally. You can't go to OSHA and say, oh shit, they're doing this to me. There's these forms. So there's a big pull by these companies. So what I would do is I would step up the workforce enforcement again, worksite enforcement, and going after these big companies. But also with a big PR campaign saying there's no jobs for you up here because if you're here legally, that we're not going to hire you.
Well, and it just goes hand in hand that the owners of those big companies are going to go to their congressman and say, I'm losing money here. I can't stay open because of this work, the enforcement actions that's going on against my corporation. And then you get your politicians going in there, and it becomes, rather than what's good for our country, it's what's good for the people that are donating money to my reelection, to my PAC, whatever it is. that's why you just don't have any confidence in most of the politicians anymore. It was actually gratifying to hear you say that Senator Grassley's office was actually great to work with.
Oh, they were
'Cause
unbelievable.
you don't
'Cause
hear
later
that
on,
about many.
yeah, that later on they went after, they called everybody on a carpet based off the information I gave them.
Yeah, he's in the thick of it right now with people from the FBI, some of the FBI whistleblowers and other stuff. I mean, the intelligence community. So he's, and think about Grassley, nice guy from Iowa and stuff. He doesn't get too, he doesn't overhang his board too much. He doesn't go bombastic. He doesn't get, he's just a kind of methodical, plodding along, hey, let's get this stuff done. And I would appreciate that versus no matter what side you're on. I'm so sick and tired of hear people scream at each other and yell. It's like, guys, let's get the work.
You're hearing the same 10 or 12 people,
Yep.
Echo chambers. There's grifters and echo chambers. That's what I call them. And there's a ton of grifters out there. We both know from these communities, especially podcasting.
Oh yeah, we've had a couple hit us up. So, hey, but let's talk about the impact though. What was it like for you? How did you and your wife handle it once this pressure of the whistleblower? Your journey through that, and once you became identified as a whistleblower, how did that impact you guys though?
I tell you what, and now that I think back about it, thanks for bringing up some great memories. No, I'm just kidding. But,
I say you volunteered for this podcast. Nobody forced you.
I know. But just think about the physical issues. I remember back now, I was like blowing a whistle and having and to be, you know what? Fuck it. I'll tell you what it's like. The gastrointestinal issues. My stomach was fucked up all the time. Stress eating, not sleeping. Thinking of my career is over with, and now I know my career is over with, but I didn't get the realization. I always thought that I would eventually get to a point where I'd be able to affect change. I didn't get that opportunity in the government. But yeah, just the issues and never knowing what's going to happen. And, you just never know how far it's going to go. Am I going to get in handcuffs? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? I didn't do anything illegal, but I'm like, is someone going to come after me? I mean, walking out my front door in the morning, I'm like, I'm like, you never know. I mean, the paranoia starts going through the roof.
Well, and a lot of our listeners are law enforcement, military, and I'm sure there's some out there thinking, well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, you did it in my opinion, this is Murph's opinion, you did it for the right reason, to protect children.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our policies and our procedures and our rules and our laws in place for a specific reason. And when those are not followed, who suffers?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a parent, as a grandparent, aunt or uncle, whatever you are, think about the children in your life. Would you want them to be in a position where they're being trafficked for sexual issues, for forced labor, going into slavery? That's what this is. Forced labor is nothing more than slavery. And they have no recourse. They probably don't speak the language. They don't speak English yet.
Yeah, who do they complain to? Like you say, who do you call?
Exactly.
Later on in life, one of my sponsors was for the podcast was a company called Deliver Fund, which goes after, they provide intelligence support for trafficking to law enforcement and stuff. And before they were my sponsor, I write a lot. So I was writing a lot of articles about trafficking. And trafficking is industrialized rape. A lot of people when they think about kids, they don't think kids are getting raped. There are evil adults out there that are not just abusing children, but they're getting paid to have that child abused. So they bring the kid in, they have him in the house. People are coming over paying all day long to have sex with a kid, to rape a kid.
Isn't that outrageous? Freaking outrageous.
Yeah, granted, a lot of the audience is listening is probably within the sphere of military and law enforcement, so they understand that there's shitheads out there, but the general public don't realize about what real trafficking is. It's industrialized rape and little kids, babies being raped. Like one of my buddies does child exploitation investigations, and it's like you hear these stories and you're like, one of the worst courses I had to take was through the Customs Academy and looking at the images of children getting raped and what they're a little baby's, and to be graphic, a little baby's vagina looks like after it's been penetrated by an adult. This shit is happening all the time. All the time. And it's we know it's not just unaccompanied alien children, but even if a small percentage is unaccompanied migrant children now, where's the humanity? Some people get so stuck on politics, but a little kid doesn't know that they're being abused. I mean, they don't know if they're illegal or not. They don't know if they're here, like why they're being abused, I should say. They know they're being abused, but they don't know why. It's like you got to take politics out of the variable, and you need to fix this problem. You need to vet these sponsors. You need to do people coming across here. Let's say they're not sponsors. Let's say they're coming across a border and they're bringing a kid. Do DNA, do rapid DNA on, find out if they're familial relation. If they come in here and say that they're a kid's coming across a border and that's their kid, and you tell them right off the bat, hey, you know what? We're going to run DNA, and if it comes back that you're not, we're going to prosecute you for smuggling or whatever. 9 times out of 10, I'd be like, oh shit, that ain't my kid. That's the types of laws that need to be fixed. You need to go back and vet these sponsors.
When these children grow up in that environment, these babies, they don't know anything different. So what do you think when they become adults? What are they going to become? Are they going to be? You hope they become hardworking, upstanding citizens of the United States, but the reality is
They're not.
They're probably going to go into what
They're
they
going to
already
continue
know.
to be victimized over and over again because somebody will recognize them for what they are, which is somebody who's been trafficked and victimized, and then they're going to keep doing it all over again. This goes back to Natasha Herzig. Even when we had an episode, nice young lady, missionary, went on Christian missions and stuff. Thought she was applying for a job, comes walking out of a restaurant, gets kidnapped, forced into trafficking by this piece of shit that's doing life now. But the point about it is when she got done, her sense of worth, and she says this in the podcast, we're not telling people anything that they can't hear, but her sense of worth was so bad, she ended up going into the pornography industry, the adult entertainment, because she had such a low she thought she wasn't, at that point, she said, I'm not good for anything else. I can't be anything else. I can't be a mom. I can't be a wife. And this is what we're condemning these kids to. And these people, you bring them across. But here's the thing. Everybody wants everybody, we'd like everybody to be safe. But at some point you kind of go, when is it the responsibility of the United States to be the repository for everybody who doesn't like their country? Yeah, you don't like your country? Well, you go fix it. But at some point, it's like we cannot take everybody. That was not the purpose of immigration, was to solve social ills in another country.
Right.
No,
I don't know if that was a question or just a rant. I'm sorry, rant. That was just.
Well, it's this whole thing is very frustrating.
Yeah,
and it affects everybody in the United States. You might think, oh, well, I'm not personally affected. Well, if you're paying taxes, you are, because all these federal agents have to be paid.
You left, you traitorous bastard, before, but it's just even like here. One of the big issues was when they were relocating a lot of Afghan refugees after our withdrawal. Mm-hmm. Guess where, Steve? They brought them up here to the what's that? IBM, or it used to be that place just north and North Loudoun.
On Route 7?
Yeah,
right there on Route 7. The old. I went to a Group Supervisor Institute there years ago for 3 weeks.
They brought in, I can't remember, I think 130, 140 families or whatever else. And Mike Chapman, who both know the sheriff, he raised concerns. He says, are these guys vetted? How do we know they're vetted? There were a lot of issues. Mm-hmm. And
it goes back to the vetting thing. It's like the vetting it's great if you have the time to vet each individual person with a trained interrogator who knows that culture as well. Hey, one thing I did want to bring up before I forget, and this is one thing that someone brought up to me the other day, and I never thought about it before, is when I blew the whistle, my career is my career. But how come nobody else did? How come nobody in that email chain blew the whistle? Even if you're a manager, how come nobody? Because that email chain came from the SESs on down. And you got to figure, like, so many people within HHS, Health and Human Services, so many people everywhere knew about this and know about it. Even to this day, they know about it. How come now, even to this day, I think they had a contractor come forward a few weeks ago, that Project Variety, or someone brought up a contractor, and he was leaking. He wasn't even doing it the right way. But how come nobody else ever came forward with this? And I could tell them right now, it's like, people have asked me, like, would I go back and do it again? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. When I retire, I have my name. I have my
Your integrity is intact. Your respect for yourself is intact.
my code. When these guys retired, and a lot of them have, and some of them you've seen on some news stations out there spouting and becoming heroes. But when you look at it, like these same people were managers back then, and they never did anything about it.
Let me ask you a question about that real quick. You talk about that email chain. Is that public record? In other words, could somebody go to the Office of Special Counsel, get that email, and see who was on there?
I don't think so. I think they redacted it all.
They did?
Pretty sure.
Of course they did. They tried to erase all evidence.
They love to redact all that crap, except my name. They'll probably throw that all out today.
And here's the funny part. I don't even know how to describe this, but here's how it all started. They identified the issue and they reported it, HHS to DHS, and you just happened to be on that email chain, and everybody just ignored it, except one person. What? His name is Jason Piccolo.
Well, Jason, why do you think they ignored it? Are they more worried about their career? Were they more worried about moving up, not causing waves, rocking the boat? Why do you think that they didn't do the right thing?
I don't know. I'm not going to put words in her mouth. I mean, I did it for me, but it had to be career.
It had to be.
It's obvious how it impacted your career. If this is the price for coming forward, what you just simply told them is that we will never get whistleblowers to come forward when they have to be subjected to this, and this is the impact. It goes back to the whole statute even says if there's retaliation, that's actionable. And how much action did they take on the retaliation with you?
Yeah.
What about the guy that wrote that original email that contained the spreadsheet on it? Did anything happen to him? Because his bosses probably went back and like, what the hell were you thinking?
When we get off of here, I'll tell you about what happened to some of these people when we hit pause later on.
We'll have to go into the SCIF. So
we'll go into the SCIF.
The secure computer information, facility. All right.
Here's the sad thing.
And I wonder what because I've been very outspoken about this over the years. I mean, I've been on all the mainstream media about it. I always wonder what they think of me. I mean, a lot of them, I know, guarantee it, think I'm an asshole and a snitch and a bitch and whatever else they called me. I've heard over the years, but it's like, I can live with myself. I'm fine, whatever. I hate the word snitch, believe me.
Yeah. You did that. Here's the thing. So you're calling me a snitch because I want to prevent kids from being raped, kids from being exploited. I mean, where is your moral compass? If that's your point of view, is that you're telling me I'm a snitch and I'm a bitch because I want to protect kids because you failed? Sorry, Murph.
But did you when you got hired in law enforcement as well as the military? Didn't you take an oath?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To defend and protect.
How many times have I taken that oath? Jeez, been with a bunch of agencies. So yeah.
So an oath is not to be taken lightly. You're making a promise. You're setting your standards to defend and protect the Constitution and the people of our country. You're doing what you took an oath to do. And so then when you go live up to your oath, all these other people have just forgotten what their oath is.
Listen, I would have stayed. There's hardly any social media of me before all this crap. And I would have stayed like that one book I wrote, Out of the Shadows. I would have stayed in the shadows. I didn't want this publicity. But, I started seeing all the news with these kids in cages and kids in this and kids in that. And I said, look, I'll tell you all about the kids in cages and all that stuff. That's why I started talking about it. And then, you know what? I started writing op-eds. And I started noticing the things I wrote in op-eds end up starting to happen with the previous administration. I said, hey, you know what? The immigration system's so broke. We have 480 or maybe 500 immigration judges to deal with 1 million plus backlog cases, plus all the cases we have now. I'm like, what we should do is, I wrote an op-ed about doing a port court, having the courts virtual down by the border or doing the courts down there. And like a few months later, the administration they called port courts. So, I mean, things happen because you speak up. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you could speak up and you have some knowledge on it, do it. You don't have to sit back and don't just scream and don't just come up with solutions.
Yeah. Just don't
exactly.
Just don't complain. Say, look, here's the problem. And here's 3 approaches we can take to solve it. It's like, I always hate the people who say, well, I don't like it. Well, what are you going to do? What's your solution?
Yeah. Did during this whole process, did any of those people ask you, how can we correct this, other than maybe Senator Grassley's office?
No, just Grassley. No, I was a
They don't give a
pariah
shit.
to everybody else. No, they don't.
No.
They,
This went from identifying a problem to it being released to our Congress, certain members of our Congress, through Senator Grassley, and then it went into self-protection mode. Screw the problem. We've got a guy that's telling us, oh shit, he's talking bad about us. What are we going to do about this? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my career? Screw the public, screw everybody in the United States. It's all about me now.
They circled the wagons instead of solving the problem.
And the sad thing is, it's not just DHS. We've had other folks on the show that have experienced similar problems that have just been left to hang out there.
We just had Pete Rostelli on talking about Fast and Furious, another whistleblower.
Yeah. Well, and look at ATF, and I'm sure every agency is like that. They get these people that are power hungry. They get promoted, and all of a sudden they think they're more important than anybody else. Promotion is nothing more than a title. You have different responsibilities, and the responsibility is not to yourself.
All right, so brother, we have talked about a lot of things. We've covered the canvas, as they say, a lot of interesting stuff. But I think what's interesting, though, too, is what are you doing now? And before we get there, though, you are Dr. Jason Piccolo.
Dr. Jason Piccolo.
Dr. Jason. This is the Dr. Jason Piccolo show on the 5 at night, live drive, whatever.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I got a pain back on my butt cheek on the left side. I need a doctor to look at it.
It's called a trooper.
I'll take a look. I took Combat Lifesaver back in '94. I'm good to go. I can stick you.
Yeah, you pull out that combat knife.
Yeah, I'll give you ibuprofen and new socks. You'll be good to go.
Dude, that's all it takes. What's the standard thing? Hey, take 2 ibuprofen. Call me in the morning.
And it's not just ibuprofen. It's 800 milligrams. 800 milligrams. People are like, "Aren't you worried about like your kidneys or liver or whatever?" I'm like, it's the Army said they're take 2.
Isn't the Army that also said burn pits were not a problem?
Oh, Christ. Yeah. I forgot about that one. No, I didn't forget about it every time I wake up in the morning. So, right. Doctor, So
first of all, I want to kind of bookend this too by saying, here we start with the guy who barely made it out of school, got F's in his first try, in college there. And so how did you get religion on education and get yourself from a community college, wannabe up through a doctorate?
A weird focus. Like I always have to have something going on. I always have to learn. I need, like, whether or not, and now it's like I'm different now that I'm like 50, and even in my 40s. I'll get into that in a minute, but I always have to learn. That's why, like, back when I got the Master's of Forensic Science, it was the only one I could do quasi online and in person, and it's the only one that was like criminal justice. So I got the Master's of Forensic Science when I was in San Diego. And then later on, when I was going to get a doctorate, I'm like, okay, I can get a PhD in criminal justice. But then I'm pigeonholed into the criminal justice world. And I really liked the terrorism aspect of strategic security. So then I found a school that I could do online that would fit into my schedule that was accredited. So I started going and I found a strategic security one. So I decided, hey, you know what? I'll do that.
That's the key thing, is finding ones that are accredited by the proper authorities, because otherwise it's just a document mill with some of these other ones.
Oh, I know. And there's a ton of them out there. And the other thing too is I figured, hey, you know what? Homeland Security, blah, blah, blah. I might as well get a doctorate in something that's going to be good.
So what was your thesis on?
It was on identifying lone wolf jihadists using social media. Was it social media? Yeah. And then it was my forensic science one was identifying criminal aliens using using federal resources. It was identifying lone wolf jihadists using federal resources and social media or something like that. Was my my doctorate. But and one thing I've learned is writing. I love writing now. Like, before I hated writing, but now, like, I've written a ton of op-eds, and now I write for a magazine called Skill Set, which is fun. Like, my last article was, well, let me backtrack here. So here's what I do now. Up until like 42, 43, everything was all about that professional resume. That's why I'm a certified fraud examiner, CVP, and every other acronyms you can get. Leadership courses, blah, blah, blah. But then, like at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I need a professional. I have a professional resume, but what am I doing for myself? So then I started getting into my personal resume, and that's where I start writing things. I start like biking. I ruck marching, and just writing books and
So what kind of biking do you do?
just bicycle, not bike. No motorcycles for me. Yeah, I just hop on. Yeah, the W.
I'm on the WNOD trail a lot.
Oh, me too. I actually that's one thing so I had a health scare last year with my heart. And so what I did was I started really getting into the WOND trail, which is a trail for listeners outside of the area. It's a trail right in Virginia. It's like 39 miles,
44 miles long from Alexandria to Percival.
Yeah. So I started doing a lot of events, self-imposed events. So like one day, and for Father's Day, instead of, getting a big breakfast, I said, I'm going to ruck to the Lincoln Memorial. So I hopped in, I rucked 14 miles to the Lincoln Memorial with 55-pound ruck on, which is basically a backpack with weights. I read a book called The 12-Hour Walk, which is walking 12 hours with no social media, no phone, no nothing, and just kind of getting in your head. So I did that. I jumped out on WND and went the other way for 25 miles. So I'm doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And then I decided, hey, you know what? What am I started doing like the Fox News and Tucker and all the other ones for a while back in 2018. And I said, you know what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start a podcast. I want to do something that's not political, something I can talk to good people and build a good network. So I started the Protectors podcast in 2019.
What do you put out one episode a week? What's your schedule?
I'm kind of sporadic. Like this week I'll put out 2 or 3. Some weeks it'll be like 1. It just depends. I don't like to hold on to podcasts because like if I have them, I'll edit them and I'll get them out there. Because I think it's kind of like, to me, it's like, I don't really have a set thing. And some people are publicizing something that's coming out the week after. I kind of have to get it out there, but it just depends on my schedule. But I've had close to 400 episodes so far. I think I've recorded 400. I just published 396. And I just got my trademark registered. So now I have that big old R. So it's the Protectors podcast now. So it's pretty cool. And
I've been through that trademark process before. The only people that are good, that people say, oh, you can do it yourself. Nah.
Nope. I tried that. Yeah. So I do that. And then the writing thing. And then I'm starting a nonprofit now. It's called the Protectors Foundation.
What are you focused on?
So I went to a shooting course about a month and a half ago because I do competitive shooting now too. I shoot International Defensive Pistol Association and USPSA, which is U.S. Pistol Association. So I do a lot of shooting. So I went to get some training because that's one thing you should do when you're in law enforcement is get additional training outside of whatever your agency's given you. And I found a lot of local, coming from the Fed world. I mean, you guys might know the feds throw the money around. You want to go to training? Hey, we'll come up with some training. But the locals don't get a lot of training. And it's whether it's from shooting, whether it's stress management, and it's not just police, it's the EMTs. What kind of follow-on training are they getting for stress management? And cultural geography. Whoever thinks about that, you're going to go work in you're a small town, you're dealing with different cultures. Influx of migration or whatever, maybe you have some cultural geography training. So I'm starting a Protectors Foundation, and what I'll do is I'll focus on getting training to small departments, whether it's police, whether it's EMS, whether it's fire, and I'll just try to get some solid training and vet the training and make sure they're getting it out there.
Brother, you're speaking our language. We just did our Q&A for Patreon that was released this morning. We recorded it yesterday. And one of the things people talked about, what would you do different? Frederick Nicolosi actually is the guy who asked us, what would you go back and do different, at your academy? And you know what Murph and I talked about? I did the same thing. Suicide's the number one killer of cops. I've lost more friends to suicide than I have line of duty. And we talked about that use of force training with your weapons, things like that. There is not nearly enough of it. Why is it that there's so much better fire discipline in the military and certain, elite units than there is? Because they train to that. You don't have to shoot 40 times. You can shoot 2 times, right? So but you don't know that until you get that training. And that was our firearms proficiency, use of force, things like that. All the things we talked about yesterday, Murph. I mean, this is spot on with.
Well, that's the other thing too. Is like we know awareness. I've seen a million nonprofits making $1 billion saying we're spreading awareness. That's great. What I want is people to get real training. Okay, you want stress management? Okay, we're not gonna do. I'm not gonna say push-ups or something. You know what I mean? We're gonna do this. We're gonna get a counselor to come in. And we're gonna talk to you and tell you where to find the right long-term training. We're gonna get someone that's gonna come in and talk to your department about where to find not just a week training or whatever. We're gonna say, hey, you know what? Okay, here's stress management. These are some techniques, but this is where you go to follow up, and this is where you're gonna get follow up for tactical medical training. How many people have to? I mean, yeah, some people are giving it to you for free, but what if we can get someone to? I could raise money from corporations to say, hey, you know what? Pay for these people to get training. Shooting discipline. Shoot. What's behind your target? You don't think about these stuff when you're doing this.
You were talking about medical training. I tell you, that's one of the things I did. I got some med packs and some other stuff. I always carry one to the range that's on my rig with me right there. And I've got two first aid kits in the back. One's kind of a shooting trauma kit. The other one's a standard first aid kit. But I went through the EMT training early on, did a lot of it. But even then I realized, man, I've got to learn, about this new blood clotting stuff.
Yeah.
I've got to learn about the new tourniquets, the way that they work. And there's just so much. I mean, training, as somebody told me one time, training is like bathing. Neither one's permanent.
What I'd like to do too is I'd like to focus on, like for fundraising, I'd really like to focus on corporations. I'd like to focus on people who are getting free police response or they're shipping free ammo, or they have big contracts and say, hey, you know what? My goal is to not go to all my listeners or all my followers and say, give me $10 a month. I don't want that. I want to be out there doing the corporate philanthropy, saying, hey, you know what? This is a 501c3. It's a tax write-off for you, but you're also going to do something good for other people.
It has impact.
Yeah. So that's my goal. I just hired an accountant or a CPA to do all my paperwork. So I'm hoping to have the nonprofit up by February.
I don't know. The minute they run your name through the database, somebody's going to flag
as long
it.
As they don't Google me. At least don't Google me.
Well, hey, but talk about the two. Let's talk about your podcast. Why did you create your podcast?
I wanted to have a voice, but then after that, I was like, okay, it's not about me. So then I was like, I just want to talk to people and I want to learn from different people. I wanted to spotlight people. So it's a protector. So it's, first responders, military, law enforcement, and those that support them. But over the years, it's kind of morphed. Everybody can be a protector. Protect your family, protect the people in your neighborhood. Everybody's a protector in a way. So now I focus on everybody. As long as you're on the up and up, and we steer clear of politics and we just have good conversations. I've had every thriller author you can imagine out there. I've had Medal of Honor holders, recipients. I've had actors. I've had everybody, everyday people. And I've had tons of nonprofits on too. That if we've talked about human trafficking, we've talked all sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, and we'll talk about that too, because offline, you folks didn't know. I shared some stuff that I was working on with you, and that's actually what we're looking at too. Is we want to build that up into not just a national but an international resource to where thanks to Al Gore, the internet has no concept of distance. You can connect to anybody. So that's the whole point: is how do we shrink the world, make a difference, solve cases, find the missing, protect the innocent. Do all those good things. So we shall continue on with that. But it's kind of a, as Murph and I found too, you say you might do it sporadic, but still when you do it though, it requires it takes some time to do a good job, to find the guest, to edit it and to put it out.
Well, and trying to get everybody on the right schedule. It's like herding cats sometimes, I mean, you were the easier ones we've dealt with, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's interesting finding, especially when you're talking to co-hosts and herding cats is the truth. But I love podcasting, man. I love talking to people.
It's a lot of fun, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wrote an article for Skill Set magazine. It should be out by the time this. So Skill Set's part of Ballistic, which is part of Athlon Outdoors, which is part of like Parade magazine. And I wrote an article on how to start a podcast. So I got that, and then. Look at the maybe in the next few months at the AARP newsletter, which we all part of AARP now. I know the three of us probably are. I'm writing an article for them on how people in our older generation can podcast.
Cool.
Well, let's talk about a couple of things, though. We don't want to gloss over too many things. The way you tried to do earlier, I was in the military, and then, we got a lot of good stuff out of that. Let's talk about the first book you wrote and why you wrote it. So, I mean, first book you wrote, right, was Out of the Shadows.
Yeah. Well, the first book was Unwavering, the first edition of it.
Well, that's right. I'm sorry, I looked at the date wrong because you have now the definitive.
Yeah, because
edition.
this is the definitive edition. So, and there's a deal with this. I went to a small publishing house in the beginning, and it didn't quite come out the way I wanted it to. It's kind of political, and there was some stuff that I really didn't want in there. Same thing with the other edition I put out. Now I kind of sanitize it so it's not a non-political book, but it's Unwavering, a border agent's journey. It's kind of my story. And I mean, you can get the book. We talked about a lot of it today, but there's going to be a lot about the operational aspects in there, about working some of these drug deals and working some of the undercover ops, and then fugitive operations and the war and a bunch of other different things are in there. But Unwavering, and I priced it at pretty much at cost. I think it's like $1 over cost. I just want people to read my story and to get it out there. And really, the big thing about it is to get it out there. So if people do want to make that decision, you can come out on top. You can tell your story. So if you do say, hey, you know what, one day I don't like what's going on, you want to make a change, you can.
Well, I'm wondering why I had to pay $39.95 for your book.
That was a special edition for you. That was the definitive special edition.
That was the special platinum deluxe.
Listen, it was
for Murph.
It was for yeah. It was definitely the for Murph one. And plus I had to you had the DEA edition, which is, big font.
Oh yeah,
no, that's the FBI.
Lots of money.
More pictures.
By the way, though, too, one of the neat things too is you got Chris Tanto Peranto to write your forward to you, and if you guys haven't, folks, seen the Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, so I was, we were talking about doing stuff. I actually happened to walk into Fox one day and ran into those three guys when Brett Baer did the special with them, and it's humbling to be in. To meet guys like that. And then it's humbling when you hear the story and then I get pissed off. I have a hard time watching that movie without getting angry again.
Mm-hmm. And then talking to Chris, like I've been on a show a couple times, 2-3 times. And yeah, it's a good dude. And these are, and so many, it's just normal people, we're all just, we're all the same. Just a good dude.
Yeah, most of us think very much alike.
Oh, and so the reason Chris got in touch with me because he saw a social media post I put out a few years ago about being the military advisor for Clown Motel 2. So I was in a movie, it's really bad, but it was clowns against military people. And I was like, do you guys have and I met the director through a friend.
I'm sorry, what was the premise of this again?
There's an actual hotel, actual motel in Nevada called the Clown Motel, and it's next to an old graveyard, and it's the creepiest damn thing you can imagine. There was a Clown Motel 1 that was dealt with that, and Clown Motel 2 was supposed to be a military squad fights clowns. So I was like, do you guys have you're doing a military squad, but do you have a military advisor? So I went out there and I was the military advisor on it. And they're like, hey, do you want to be in it? And I'm like, sure. It's so bad. I get killed by a clown. I'm like 30 pounds overweight. It probably could have been a clown. But it was like, it was so funny. So Chris is like, there's a real Clown Motel. And I'm like, yep. So if anybody, you Google Clown Motel, you're going to, middle of nowhere. It's past Area 51. So as I'm driving out there from Vegas, I stop at the Area 51 and I'm walking out there like just by the front gates. There's no photos and stuff. I'm literally, this is the middle of nowhere and it's a gate. It's an open gate. I'm there for a minute and all of a sudden a pickup truck comes out of nowhere. And I'm like, where'd this truck come from? And it's just like kind of shoos me on away. But yeah, it's the Clown Motel is probably about a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour away from Area 51. So it's
look at there, Specialist
crazy.
Egan.
That's me, Specialist Egan.
Clown Motel is where all the politicians stay. Oh, sorry. But thank you. I'll be here all week. Thank you very much.
That'd be Capitol, wouldn't it? The Capitol building?
Oh, my gosh.
No, they call that geriatric park. I mean, anyway, we digress. We're not talking politics. We're making political jokes. There's a difference. Hey, well, so you wrote that first book. So what prompted you then to write the second book? Was it something that was left unsaid, or did you want to take a different angle?
Yeah, it was just, the second book, Out of the Shadows, is really, I call it like a primer on like the unaccompanied alien children crisis. And it's kind of like me talking about that and then talking about the whistleblowing. And I kind of break it down like, okay, this is what the problem is. This is how you kind of fix it. And this is who I am and why I did what I did. So it's basically just a whistleblower portion of my book, more tailor made to what the crisis at the border is.
Did you have to submit anything for publication review?
No, I didn't.
Okay, because I
I'm
was
pretty
wondering
sure that wouldn't have been approved.
Yeah, I was going to say it would have come back with one long black mark through the whole book.
Yeah, and I didn't, I didn't work in a skiff. I didn't work in any, and nothing I talk about is on class. I mean, it's all on class.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
cool.
I didn't identify any TTPs or anything.
So, what's next for you?
What's next is my next book, Pivot. It's going to be about transitions and stuff.
Transitioning from what?
Transitions, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, we're talking
First
medical transitions,
that's the
career
funny
transitions.
thing is, the initial title was going to be like transition, but then I'm like, I need to change it to like pivot. It's going to be like navigating life's roadblocks and detours. And it's going to be interviews with all sorts of different people on how they transition from like the military, from careers, from combat, from everywhere. So I've done about 7 or 8 interviews so far. Just a different people that have been all over the world and just different types of people. So I'm working on that now. I'm going to continue to write, and then I'll retire here in the next month or 2.
Oh, well, you're not going to retire. I mean, you're just going to retire from the government, but you're still going to work, right?
Yeah, I teach college on the side too. So I teach Des Moines Community College and I teach St. Joe's University out of Philly.
Cool. You just do that all online?
Yeah.
How'd you get those gigs?
Des Moines Community College teaches a Homeland Security certificate program, or at least they did for TSA employees. So I went and started teaching their Homeland Security type stuff. Then I teach white collar crime, constitutional law. And then St. Joe's needed someone to develop a graduate course in cybersecurity. So I went and did that. Now I teach that cybersecurity.
So how did you get into cybersecurity from where you were?
So when I worked for DoD, I was able to go to called Introduction to Networks and Computer Hardware, and I learned how to take computers apart and put them back together, and all sorts of other stuff. And then I did some computer forensics type stuff for DoD, and then later on, I just started getting into cyber. So I know Homeland Security, I know this and that, so I ended up developing the course for them.
Once his personal account was attacked, he wanted to find out how the hell that happened. And who did it.
Jeez.
Sons of bitches, I will hunt you down. Take my Winchester or my lever action, my Henry repeating rifle. And you got a few of those too. So yeah, we were showing some of those. So you've got a good collection of repeaters.
Lever actions.
Yeah, lever actions.
I love my lever action. I got 4 of them right now. I got 30-30, 2 44s, and a 35 Remington. So
you're talking about you're doing competition shooting pistol stuff. What's your sidearm of choice?
I was shooting optics with a SIG P320 Legion X5, and then I went to a Walther PDP full size with optics. But now I'm using I took a SIG 320 compact and I put a Wilson combat lower on it and a Gray Guns trigger, and I use that. Iron sights, straight iron sights, and it's fun. It's just such a fun gun.
I had to qualify for our concealed carry. Once you get out, if you want to keep it, you're going to have to do the HR 218 thing. And I didn't bring my weapon with me when I went back, but it's like, so they gave me a Smith & Wesson that had the optics on there, and I never shot that before. And it's like,
oh yeah,
okay, it's good, but it's a little weird, but it's like, I'm so used to the old, align the sights, do the old thing. How do you prefer the optics versus the iron sights?
If I'm going to shoot a 2-gun or a 3-gun, I'd like to have optics because some of the targets could be a little bit farther out. But anything between like 10 and 15 yards, I like to keep the iron sights because I could find my iron sights quicker than I could find the red dot.
Yeah.
Really?
I think so. Draw to fire. I like the red dots though, but
they're pretty sweet.
I like all of it. What am I talking about? I actually I got a 1911. I want to start shooting a competition with that just to see what it's like.
Hey, have you been out to the new range in Loudoun County called XCal?
I have.
Dude, I was just there this weekend with my son. We used to go to Silver Eagle, but I tell you, XCal has got...
I've got a membership there now, yeah.
Oh, you do? Yeah, they got a lot of good things going on there. And boy, you haven't been out there, have you, Murph?
No, I don't think it. I'm not sure it was there.
Next time you come back, you got to go to that because you talk about a selection. They've got a selection of knives now, so they've got their knife display opened up. Plus, they have just all the different handguns and rifles and everything else they've got. You can even rent. They had a guy shooting fully auto while we were there. You're able to rent.
You could rent Barrett 50 cals there too.
Yeah, Barrett 50 calibers.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
Is that an indoor range with a 50 cal?
Oh, they have got, it's state of the art, man. In fact, what's so cool about it is you can sit out in the lobby and watch people in there shooting and go, whatever you do, don't put me next to this dude because he's going to get somebody killed.
Oh, the other thing too is you could rent the private ranges there too, and that's awesome. I like doing that. Just like if I'm going to go, because I'm an instructor in that too. So if I'm going to bring anybody out there, it was like badass. But it's funny because Black Aces Tactical sent me a lever action shotgun, and I brought it out there, and they're like, "Oh, you better not." Lever action shotgun.
I've never seen one. Who makes it?
Okay, hold on. You guys talk for a second. I'll show you this while we're doing it.
Well, it was funny too because during our quick break here, Jason had to do a quick speaking engagement, so you probably don't know where we broke and came back at, but he was showing us his all of his different rifles. Wow, look at that! That is a nice
pistol grip.
Yep. It's a pistol grip lever action shotgun.
What's the length on the barrel? 18 inches.
What is the tactical advantage, though, to having a lever action versus pump or semi-automatic, or is it just style?
None.
It just looks cool.
As long as it looks cool.
It does
it's a cool factor. Yeah.
I mean,
the pump shotgun, just the sound of it is intimidating.
Oh, I think I don't know if I think I told you this story, Murph. My one quick story before we go here. So when I was there we go again. There's a nice setup.
Yeah,
look at that.
Now you're talking.
What we're looking at is a 300 blackout. 300 blackout pistol with a Nomad suppressor and a Surefire light system and Swamp Fox optics. 300 blackout. I built that one too. I love building ARs now.
My son is really good about building ARs.
That's a 300 blackout, but I've built two 9mm ones, 9mm ARs, and I built a 308. So talk about XCal. I'm out at XCal last week, and I'll let you guys go here in a minute because we can talk guns for the next 38 hours. I'm out at XCal, and I'm like, okay, I got to zero this 308 AR-10 I built. And this poor guy next to me was shooting a 22 and just zeroing it in. And I get up there, and I'm like, I forgot how loud this damn thing is. And I'm with
it throws chunks of gunpowder too. You feel it hit your face.
It's not even that. It's the pressure too. Yeah. It's like everything. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, boom, boom. And my buddy's like behind me. He's like, holy shit. So I look up and everybody's standing back like 10 feet. And I'm like, oh, I'm almost done. I just want to tighten it up a little bit.
I'm sorry.
The 22 is going pew, pew.
I know. Because I zeroed my I have a AR2 and an AR-556. And I was like, I need to zero that. And I zeroed that the second, like after that. And it's like, ping, ping. Yeah. It's like nothing. Oh, man.
So now tell the truth. Really, the reason you got up there is like you just wanted to show off, didn't you?
Oh, of course.
Tell the truth now. Absolutely.
That 308. Oh, my gosh.
So, Murph, you're talking about the sound shotguns make. So when I was a young line of police officer, we get I'm working midnight shift. We get a burglary call at one of our local grocery stores. Front glass is broken out. So, we kind of do the front five, back five. I'm standing outside because, of course, they're sending the senior officers in. We got a guy front and back on the corners. Two guys go in, one with the shotgun. And pretty soon we hear kaboom. And I thought, oh my God, shots fired. He goes, no, everything's 10-4. It's 10-4. What had happened was they were walking around the corner. And you know those ice machines, when they drop ice, what do they sound just like? They sound like you're racking a shotgun. He thought somebody racked a shotgun. He turned around and blew away an ice machine.
Oh, Christ.
Oh, there you go.
What were you talking about before about training? Yeah, Protectors Foundation. Everybody keep an eye out for that in a couple months.
Dude, this was 1982. There wasn't...
When you get that up and running, let us know. We'll post it on our podcast sites.
Oh, we do. We have a lot of people, law enforcement, and growing military law enforcement, and I think training is the big thing. I'm telling you.
Oh, I know. I had you speak about the 80s. I had Ed Morales on from the FBI shootout.
Yeah, we want to get him. In fact, was it Jack Garcia's make the introduction for us?
Yeah, we've got we've had a few of the folks involved in the shootouts too. So it's like, hey, well, look, dude, like I said, we could talk about this all day. Let's leave it with this though. Biggest takeaway for you from your career, with where you are now, with everything you've gone through. One of the things we try to do is, why should people get into this line of work anymore? I mean, you look at what's going on, you look at how people get treated, but yet we still need good people in doing this job.
Well, here's a little something you probably didn't bring up, and I don't think I brought it up anywhere else yet. I did bring it up in social media, but about 3 weeks ago, I went and took the Metropolitan Police Department Reserve Officer training. I went through the prospect day. So I'm put in to become a reserve cop with DC Police, which is crazy. I know. I'm 50. So anyway, I'm the oldest guy there, and I'm probably the only one going
Not
to
so
become
much the age, but DC, man. I mean, there's a lot of places if you wanted to just have a little fun and be a reserve cop. I get you a couple small towns, Percival out here,
I got
Middleburg.
to keep my foot in the door, you know? So I'm in there, and it's the prospect day for everybody. I think I'm the only reserve one there for reserve. And I'm looking around the room, and it's a lot of young kids. And there was a couple kids from like Wisconsin that flew in just to become a DC cop. And everybody there was asking me, they found out that I was an agent, and they're asking me all about it and blah, blah, blah. But it reminded me, oh, and before we get to the remind me part, I did the PT test and I jumped over the damn 6-foot fence. So, there we go.
All right.
I can still do it. My wife was like, I don't know, are you sure? And I'm like, I passed it. I beat a lot of those kids too. So anyway, listening to the energy they have about getting into law enforcement reminded me of something 20-something years ago, like remembering what it was like and not being disgruntled. And don't get disgruntled. The job is not dead. You may not have the support now, but everything's cyclic. So it's going to come, it ebbs and flows. But if you get into the job for the right reasons, get into it. But don't look at it if you don't want to look at it, I should say, you don't have to look at it as a career. You could look at it as like a military thing. You know, people join the Army. My first term was 3 years. I ended up doing 5 active altogether with all the training and everything else. Look at it as part of your book, one of the chapters in your book. Get in to be a cop for 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, whatever. If it's something you always wanted to do it. You don't have to stay. You can go on and do a million other things. I just turned 50. I mean, you know, you could do anything. I've had 7 different careers within 30 years, it seems like. But don't look at it as you have to do a career, and keep that energy going. You start getting disgruntled, you don't like it, get out, do something else.
Yeah.
And just make sure you're getting into it for the right reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It's discouraging too, because you see, when you see how a lot of look, we go through cycles of this right now, but right now it's been pretty tough on law enforcement. And there's a variety of reasons. A couple things are self-inflicted, but not everything. Everybody thinks it's always the police's fault. It's not. At some point, people got to learn to become good members of society as well. They have to learn to respect the rule of law. It's not, you don't have to like the cop, but you got to follow the law, and that's one thing I learned too. You don't get to pick and choose the laws. So, but I just like hearing what you're saying too. I'd like seeing the fact that there's some people starting to show up, because I think it's that initial enthusiasm that they have. Get them in there. And then what'll happen is some people will move on, but some will stay. And what we hope is the good ones stay. We get enough good ones stay that they become the next leaders of tomorrow, make the right kind of policies and lead the people where they need to go.
Oh, and one thing I want to jump onto that with is this. If someone gives you a pat on your back somewhere in your career and says, don't fuck up and you'll move up, disregard. Do what you're doing. You're probably doing something good. Because it's that don't fuck up, you're going to move up thing that really, these are the type of people that move up to the top. They become risk averse, and they just think about their career.
Steve Jobs said it best. If you read his biography, I think it was Walter Isaacson. He says, look, A players want to work with A players. B players hire C players. Then pretty soon you got the bozo explosion.
It's a good way to put it. My first supervisor on DEA, when I got to Miami back in the 80s, he brings the new guys in. There was a brand new enforcement group in Miami. And he said, look, I got your back as long as you're right. Well, if I'm right, I don't need you to have my back. I got my own back. Exactly. I need you when I fuck up, and it's a learning experience. But he was one of those guys. It's all about me.
Yeah, we're behind you as long as you're right, and if not, we're going to be way behind you.
Good luck to you.
All right, man. Well, hey, look, let's bring this to a close. This has been fun. What I like is that there's some great philosophy, nuggets of philosophy people can take away from this. Get your books, Out of the Shadows, a government whistleblower's firsthand account of how the protection of migrant children became a political firestorm. And then we want the definitive edition of Unwavering, a border agent's journey. Not the gold-plated edition, the definitive edition. The gold-plated edition is Merce edition for $29.95. Here's how to order. Where else can we find you, Jason?
Yeah, what's your website?
Head over to jasonpiccolo.us, protectors.us. I do everything on social media is usually Dr. Jason Piccolo. So at Dr. Jason Piccolo. And then look for the Protectors Foundation coming up soon. So that'll probably be theprotectors.org or somewhere along those lines. But
Somewhere along that line. All right, brother. Well, hey, look, thank you for what you did. This is, people can't see this, but this is us saluting you for a job well done, soldier, agent, officer, doctor. So, hey, great job, man. It was great having you on.
And just, you know what, before you leave, I just want to say thank you for your service to our country, both in the military and law enforcement. Thank you for living up to your oath and maintaining the line. You lived up to your standards, the standards we all swear an oath to when others don't. It's a damn shame the way things have worked out for you and that you've had to move on and that, people just use you as a stepping stone. But my gosh, man, thank you so much. God bless you, Jason. Thanks for coming on Game of Crimes.
You guys don't go anywhere. Everybody else, stay tuned for the debrief.
Tell you what, if this doesn't raise your blood pressure, get your blood boiling and say, WTF over, Senator, Congressman, Congresswoman, whatever, member of Congress. What the hell were you thinking? And my biggest question, Steve, is are they still doing it? His biggest concern is he raised it. They were supposed to be vetting, and now there's 250,000 potential sponsors. Are they vetting them before they turn these vulnerable? And when he said vulnerable, he said tender age. We're talking about kids under the age of 10 over to people with criminal felony convictions.
Yeah. You think they have good plans for those children? If you do, you're very naive. No, they don't. And again, we said this in the introduction of this. Thank you to Jason for having the guts to stand up and do what was right. We still think you need professional help because of what you were doing out in the mountains there by yourself all night long when your backup is 2 to 3 hours away. Holy cow.
Yeah, dude,
but you know what
the hell were you thinking?
That's just a fantastic example of what our Border Patrol agents are willing to do to try to protect our border. They don't make that much money. They're one of the lowest paid federal agencies in the United States. And look what they're doing, man. I'm proud of those guys.
And here's a guy who served our country in the military, served it in federal law enforcement. Here's a kid who went from F's in community college to Dr. Jason Piccolo. Proud of you, brother.
I saw on social media he was out at the SHOT Show. And Jason, I'm sorry I missed you out there, brother. I'd love to meet you in person, and we will meet someday. So
yeah. Oh, and he's just right over from me. So we're going to go out and meet on the trail someday and ride bikes. So
yeah,
we hope you guys enjoyed that episode. If so, go hit the comments up. Let us know what you think. Head on over to Apple and Spotify. Hit those 5 stars. We don't know how it works. It's magic. It's Disney. It's David Copperfield, David Blaine, all rolled into one. But we know it helps us. So we would really appreciate your support on this. You want to read Jason's books? Head on over to gameofcrimespodcast.com. Hit the book tab section, and you'll see Jason's books and the ones that he wrote. And he's got a third one coming out, Murph, you just said, so you're going to have to wait for that. What's the name of it?
Yep, the new one's going to be Pivot, Navigating Life's Roadblocks and Detours, but the books he has out now are Unwavering, the what they call the Definitive Edition, and Out of the Shadows. These are good reads, people.
Yeah, and the link for them are on our page, as well as a link to his page. He's also got the Defenders podcast, which Murph and I are both going to be on. I'm already scheduled for it, and I know Murph will be scheduling soon when he comes out of his stupor, when he gets his knee surgery done and he's whacked out on all those pain meds.
We need to do some recordings while I'm on the pain meds and see what happens. It's going to
be like those videos that kids that come back having to have their teeth pulled. And I just killed Johnny. Anyway,
what do you mean? They don't have any grapefruit at the grocery store.
Well, maybe we'll do a live stream of that when Murph is under the influence. So
I don't think so.
Yeah. So follow us on that thing called social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But where you got to be is Patreon. Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. Again, listen to our case of the month. If you're not on Patreon, go join up. Listen to the case of the month. We talked about the targeted killings out in Tulare County, California, the little town of Goshen, and the implications for it, how we would approach it, some of the investigative steps. I think it's one of our best cases of the month we've looked at in a long time. All of our stuff is great. This one's a notch above. But that's where you got to be. We've got stuff coming out, too. We've got our final episodes of The Real DEA Narcos, talking about The Real DEA Narcos Cali Edition. If you want to ask Jason, what the hell were you thinking? You got to ask Dave and Chris, what the hell were you guys thinking doing some of the stuff they did? But you'll only find out if you're on patreon.com/gameofcrime. So again, we wrap up another fantastic episode. We got great stuff. We got some good stuff coming up too. We've got a British cop that's going to be coming up very soon on a 30-year-old cold case murder that was turned into a book and a podcast. So that's good stuff. We've got a guy, one of your friends introduced us to. We've got another guy coming out of the great state of Oklahoma in the Midwest, a Midwest kid. And we've got some fantastic episodes coming up, Murph.
It is. And we're lining up more and more. Looks like we're going to get one of the retired FBI agents that was involved in the bank robberies in South Florida back in the 1980s, I believe it was, in which a couple of FBI agents were shot. So it's not a funny, laughing matter, but it is historical. And it just keeps going and going. We've got a list of guests that you won't believe. So what we ask is thank you so much for what you're doing. Please share with your friends. And we're just trying to grow this network so we can learn more about the heroic actions of our law enforcement professionals out there.
And stay tuned. We'll have an announcement about what we're doing coming up soon, but not yet. That's a tease for next time. So thank you guys once again for playing the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Dr. Jason Piccolo Extended Platinum Edition Game of Crimes.